This is All India Radio. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on the Citizenship Amendment Act. The participants are political analysts K.S. Sachidananda Murthy and Professor Subrato Mukherjee. K.V.Prasad, journalist, initiates and moderates the discussion.
The Citizenship Amendment Act has come into force, and the government, as it has promised on the floor of the House, this is an act which allows Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Buddhists who have faced religious persecution in the countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan to get citizenship in the country, because some of them have been staying as undocumented people or also described as illegal migrants. To remove the stigma of such a thing, the government enacted this thing, and the Parliament passed the bill in December 9th in Lok Sabha and then December 11th in Raj Sabha, and later the President of India gave his assent to it. Professor Mukherjee, this act, the basic thing has been set forth clearly both by the Home Minister in his speech in Parliament, and since then the broad contours have been out there. And there was subsequent clarification from the government that it is not an automatic entitlement. The people will have to qualify by the norms as set, the Citizenship Amendment. Your first thoughts on that?
Well, if you really look to the modern world is based on constitutional citizenship. And Indian citizenship is also defined by the Constitution, who will be a citizen and who will not be. And if you really look to the history of citizenship, even in ancient Greece, there was a concept of citizens and resident aliens and of course slavery. And then coming to the modern times, the 20th century actually is a defining moment, and when the movement of people assumed a larger scene and also the census started coming up since the 19th century, what we find is that important documents like passport and other things started emerging to define the nationality of different people, and also broad category of two citizenship notions. One is jus soli and the other is jus sanguinis. Jus soli means that whosoever is born in the soil automatically becomes citizen of that nation, and jus sanguinis is dependent on the parenthood. That's how it is defined. Now coming to the Indian context, if you really look to, the problem is that once the entire South Asia was one nation, but 47 brought in the major division, and it became two nations, and ultimately it became three. Out of this, the first we find that the huge migration of millions of people at the time of partition, which many people really did not expect, but it did take place, mainly on religious grounds. A large number of Hindus migrated from the newly created nation of Pakistan, and similarly some Muslims, not as large as the Hindus, migrated to Pakistan. And this continued. And then there was a Nehru-Liaquat Ali Pact. It was thought that the problem will be solved. Then remember in 1971, when the Pakistan broke up, there was a question about 10 million refugees who were stationed mainly in West Bengal, and that created some kind of a serious problem for India. And Jayaprakash Narayan at that time toured the entire world as India's ambassador. And like that, it became a very problematic issue, ultimately leading to the Assam Accord during Rajiv Gandhi's prime ministership, where it was accepted that the people who are not really citizens of the India may not be able to stay on in India. So within this historical background, I think the ruling coalition at the center now, it was part of their program that they will do this. So in a way, it's a fulfillment of their promise to the nation and the program that the minorities who are facing severe problem of persecution in the neighborhood countries of the mentioned countries, they would be accommodated in India. That's what broadly it is patterned. But then, of course, as you point out, Prasad, this will not be automatic. There are all kinds of verifications essential, and the process has just begun. It will take a much longer time to really realize it.
Mr. Murthy, the government has also come up with a clarification in a series of issues on this NRC in the form of frequently asked questions, including why certain minorities, say the Ahmadiyyas or people who are also feel persecuted in Pakistan, or the Rohingyas, can they not be included? And I think they have clarified that these people, the natural law which exists in the country, if people can follow the thing and they can apply and take on. But since then, there have been several layers as people seem to add. Before we go on to what's happening in terms of the people's agitation or what people are talking, your thoughts on it?
I think what has happened is the plain reading of the bill, and now which has become an act of parliament, has mentioned specific religious groups. So, except the Hindus, the rest are minorities in India. And then the name Muslim is omitted from that. I mean, the subsequent clarification on the Muslim sects which face persecution, especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan, it has been there, but then it has been lost in the din over the debate that the government has brought in a bill, and also the urgency with which it was brought at the last minute. This is a good way of managing parliament when the government has majority, but then there was not sufficient discussion. The kind of points which were there in the bill did not explode till the bill got passed. So I think that is the apprehension which has come in, because when the bill was written, it was written to, that's what the Home Minister very clearly said, in these three countries, the people who are facing religious persecution.
And were minorities in those countries.
Were minorities of that country. And that's why the name, the religion Muslim was not included, because these were three Muslim countries. But then that meant that those who are non-Muslims will be made automatically treated as refugees in India. And then, of course, as the Professor pointed out, they have to fulfill conditions which should be laid, which have not been made clear, because that will be the rules of the Act which has to be yet made public. The purpose was that here was a humanitarian issue which has been hanging fire for nearly 7 decades, and that we could not do it because the Constitution came into force. The citizenship provision in that said, as on the day of the domicile, as on the day of the Republic, before that. So which means after 1950, there was no hope for refugees from Pakistan to become citizens. So they had to prove that they had crossed into India between 1947 and 1950. And then, of course, the refugees from Bangladesh had no hope at all as per the Constitution. So BJP and RSS have always been arguing that the numbers vary. I mean, people put it as 4 to 5 million, some people put it as 20 million. That of these people are stateless citizens, or they're living on some kind of a permit and all that at the mercy of the authorities. So the BJP, RSS have been arguing for this, that they have to be treated as genuine citizens. Similarly, there has been persecution of Sikhs in Afghanistan, Sikhs in Pakistan, and the Buddhists in Bangladesh. So all these were included. I mean, the number of these communities are much smaller than the Hindus who have come from these three countries.
Professor Mukherjee, you had mentioned about the Assam Accord. Soon after this amendment bill, which has now become Act, the bill itself was passed. People in Assam had entered the agitation mood. Some of it was concerning about all those people who have been, because prior to that, Assam had the National Register Citizen, which identified almost 20 lakh people who don't have documents to prove that they belong to the state of Assam. I think that is the concern, that will they be automatically be included now? Some of the apprehensions the government has from time to time come up with this clarification, but if you could just bring some perspective to that.
Well, if you really look to the Assam problem, which is against the legislation that the parliament has enacted, and the reasons are many. If you remember that a large section of the Northeast has called the inner line permit, and one way of dealing with it, that is central government really said that even Manipur, which was not a part of the permit, it would be included in that permit, but that was not enough, and the other Northeast states were equally agitated. Now coming to Assam, if you really look to, it's a very serious problem. The problem is that it's the tea gardens, when it started developing in the 1850s, and then the Brahmaputra Valley and the Barak Valley, where the land was very fertile but very difficult. And it was at that time the British administration really offered a lot of lucrative proposals like tax concession, ownership of land. Thereby, a lot of people from that time, from East Bengal, migrated to Assam, and that a particular section of the Muslims there are there for more than, say, 100 years. Why 100, 150 years or more? But then there is another category of people, mainly from Sylhet. If you remember that at the time of partition, there was a referendum in Sylhet, and Sylhet went to Pakistan, and there a large number of Hindus migrated to areas like Silchar. So thereby the demographic situation totally changed, so much so that the lower Assam, the Barak Valley, is totally Bengali dominated, whereas the Brahmaputra Valley, the upper Assam, is mainly Assamese dominated. And that created some kind of a fear in the Assamese of becoming the minority. If I may give you an example, actually the Tripura problem was also very similar, and after the partition, if you really look to, the immigrants became a much larger section than the local tribals. So that was the fear of the Assamese, and to that then there was a long agitation. There was a movement called Bengali Kheda. That was not on the basis of religion, but it was on the basis of Bengalis versus Assamese, and that lasted for quite some time. And then, of course, the rise of AGP, and then the accord. And what happened was that the accord was not implemented. And in the recent times, we find that the accord was being implemented, and then that national register was being made. But what was found out, that a large number of names that were included were actually of Hindus. And then there was a lot of allegations of corruption, favoritism, and wrong entry that led to the... Now, what has happened really is there are a lot of misgivings in the mind of the people, not only in Assam and Bengal, but throughout India, that what happens to the people who do not have really any documents. And it is estimated that may be high. So I think what the government can do to assess the feeling of the ordinary people, to really come out with a program that there is nothing to fear, and all those people who are staying here legally for decades or centuries or whatever it may be, they would be sympathetically treated, and only a very small number of people who may not be Indian citizens, they will be dealt appropriately. Now here there is, I think, a very important point also to note, that the bulk of the migrants are from Bangladesh. And Bangladesh government has said that we will take back if there are valid documents. Now the problem is the question of valid documents. So first I think the government will have to work out the details of documentation and really work out the details and then try to solve this tricky problem.
Mr. Murthy, one of the things, even during the debate, members of parliament, especially those from the opposition, asked the government many a time that what will happen to those people who remain but are not documented people or illegal migrants, what will happen to them? Will they be moved out? Where will they be sent? And so on and so forth. And the Home Minister was very clear that they remain in this country, and some of them, as subsequent clarifications came, that if they fulfill the norms of citizenship by way of naturalization or whatever, they can apply and seek citizenship. But this is one fear that continues to be heard.
I think Home Minister was careful in his reply. The rhetoric of some of the proponents of the Citizenship Amendment Act was that across the country, huge detention camps are being built. And there were some photographs which later were said proved to be morphed pictures of detention camps coming up in different states and all that. So that led to the rumor mills escalating. And I think that is where a communication gap exists. Even Assam. Now, Assam Accord has one cut-off date to determine the citizenship. Whereas the Citizenship Amendment Act says
that it was December 2014.
That is the long, this thing of 43 years. That is, those who are coming to India between 1971 and 2014, and those who belong to these specific religious denominations, that they will get citizenship. So that has caused the agitation. And then also the other thing is, simultaneously all other leaders said, we are going to quickly implement the National Register of Citizenship. That has been already a bone of contention in Assam. And then there is also the other assertion, no, your Aadhaar is not your citizenship proof. Now, what is the proof then? Passport, is it not or not? There is no clarity on that. The courts have said that passport is something which is issued, or electoral identity cards are issued after verification of citizenship. Now, Aadhaar does not apply only to citizens. Aadhaar is for everyone who is a resident of India. But passport and EIC, if they are not looked at as a valid document, then what becomes a document? So the fear is that is there an attempt to deliberately keep some people out, and not just belonging to one religious denomination, but those who are proved to be critical, those who are not unwanted. And then also in India, we have the experience that all issuance of official documentation, from ration cards to Aadhaar, everything has had its controversies. Aadhaar went through a huge litigative process in the Supreme Court. So that's why there's no trust in the system, and that the system can be manipulated to deny. So I think this is where the government has to come out very clearly, has to work out the boundaries of how it will be done. And also, if suppose this whole exercise of this thing is how many people will get citizenship. I mean, Assam, they're already talking about the ethnic, this thing being diluted and eroded, ethnic domination. In fact, ruling party MLAs have told the Chief Minister that we cannot allow this citizenship. Now, even assuming that Assam is made inner line permit
or
state,
the exemptions being
and then
given.
none of these people are given citizenship, but how do you move them to other states? Now, we have seen already states saying that no, we only want the sons of the soil to reside, sons of the soil to get facilities, sons of the soil should get jobs. Andhra Pradesh is the latest to say that. So it's a very, very complex set of issues. It's not just amending the Citizenship Act.
Professor Mukherjee, of course, before I come to the question, I was reminded because during the public statements by the Home Minister, I think on the NRC when he said it will be taken up countrywide or nationally, the clarity was that only those who are infiltrators will be identified through this exercise, and genuine citizens who have been living here will not have to worry about it. But coming to the other important issue which Mr. Murthy also raised, the question of where do you send these people who are going to grant citizenship? And this is something probably you will be very well to put us, the famous Dandakarnya project, which in itself was a major project, and reference to it came even during the debate in both houses of parliament, because this is exactly how do you locate people, where do you make them stay so that they earn their livelihood and become assimilated into the society.
Reallocation is a very serious problem, and Mr. Murthy's point, I think, is largely valid, because there is an increasing feeling of localism, and within that context, the constitutional guarantee of free movement is the prerequisite of modern nationhood. If you really look to the Dandakaranya project, it was a much smaller scale, and that also created a lot of problem both in Madhya Pradesh, and it took decades to settle down. Now, in that kind of an experience, people will not like to go through that. We'll have to have a lot of clarity. What exactly you want to do. In a nation where millions are unemployed, there is also a question of the extra burden. For instance, if you really look to that, the largest chunk of this category would be coming from Bangladesh, the Bengalis, and they neither know English, they don't know Hindi. So naturally they would like to settle down in West Bengal. And West Bengal is twice as populated as the rest of India. And then how do you really put these 2 crores of people? Apart from that, I think we'll have to solve the international problem in a way. For decades, we have told the minorities that come what may, this is your country, and you stick here and make your presence felt. And then also the question of the international reaction. So I think we'll have to move very carefully and cautiously. Some newspapers are also putting arguments like a moratorium or even abrogation of what has been done. But whatever it may be, the first important thing that we should attempt right now is the nation is right now fractured, and we should try to build a larger consensus and create confidence in the administration, and also create an atmosphere of what Gandhiji used to call beauty of compromise, and then proceed slowly so that we reassure both the Indians and the friends abroad that India is not forgotten its traditional hospitality, its unity in diversity, and the course correction would be made.
Mr. Murthy, as Professor Mukherjee also pointed out, the international dimension of this whole thing, and we already saw issues being raised in several capitals of the world. More significantly, of course, Bangladesh. Then there were some voices from Afghanistan, especially on the persecution issue. When it was mentioned, they said, of course, there a clarification later. This was the previous Taliban regime in particular, when the Indian minorities there, or the Sikhs or the Hindus, had to face this kind of situation. Bangladesh, we just heard the statement that they're willing to take back if proved. But that is a thing that we need to look at, and especially we have a neighborhood first policy.
Absolutely. I think some of the proponents of the Citizenship Amendment Bill during the debate in Parliament and later got carried away. And these are refugees, these are people who have fled persecution, they have fled genocide. So which means automatically when you say people have fled genocide, you are describing these three countries, because the Amendment Act is only for people who have fled persecution, genocidal. So that means the states of Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh. And now we have an excellent relationship with Bangladesh and Afghanistan. And we have been taking up the issue of the persecution of the Hindus and the Sikhs in Pakistan. But then the governments of Bangladesh and Afghanistan thought, what is our best friend in the region? India, which is such a thing, with which we are cooperating on many fronts, saying. So I think that is where the alarm bells went off even in our government also, that I think we have allowed the rhetoric of some people to affect or at least color the relationship. And then also the world over, there was this reaction that India suddenly, as Professor Mukherjee rightly said, we have built up this narrative of this country as a tolerant country, which as our Prime Minister has always said, Vasudhaiva Kutumbam is one of the sayings. The world is our family. And suddenly it is saying that this particular religion is not want. And also we must realize the context that most of the countries in the world, I think there are very few exceptions, are grappling with the issue of refugees, exodus, whether you take United States or Canada or the whole of entire Europe, Turkey, Syria. I mean, you move to Australia, in Asia, it's happening in many things. So they all have their own experiences to share, their own things to look at. This suddenly India, which was in the midst of all this, was a calm place. Whereas the Indian government, which has again, this government is known for its ability to converse, ability to convince people, because they've just won a massive re-election. Why the youth are so angry and why this apprehension has come in. So I think on the international front, we have to do a lot of fence bending. But I was very encouraged by the statement made by United States yesterday that India is in a strong dialogue with its help and that things will get sorted out.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said there is a very strong conversation happening within India itself on this issue, and they are themselves looking at it, because I think it was in response to a question whether United States was, or what was United States' reaction to what was happening in India.
Right.
But Professor Mukherjee, there are also shades, because within the US we all know, while the State Department and the US administration may hold a view, the US Congress is independent in itself, is taking a slightly different approach on many issues, including one of India, even though there is a bipartisan support for India and things Indian. So this is again once a very, very careful tread one has to do.
Well, Prasad, don't forget the separation of powers. And President Wilson, in a way, who really thought of the League of Nations, but then he could not lead the nation to join it. So the American system is very different from ours. And in that kind of a situation, we have to maintain a delicate balance and reassure the United States and the world that India's perennial values remain intact, and then it will be conducive to foreign investment. That's what we need right now. And cultural plurality will be maintained as India has always done so from the beginning of its civilizational status.
Mr. Murthy, of course, coming back to the same, we had, of course, in UK, you could explain because there were elections and there was a very strong division happening within the country itself, which resulted in the kind of statements that emanated from UK. But US Congress is increasingly, because we've had 2 or 3 instances, and even the foreign minister has had an outreach with the Senate panel. But still, there is some distance we need to cover.
I think the US Congress, Mr. Prasad, you're familiar with it. You worked there for a year. The thing is that Democrats are always much more concerned about human rights issues, and they control the House of Representatives, and there is
and they just moved an impeachment against their own president.
And there is strong presence in the US Senate, though there is a minority there. And also, one of the things for them is India moving, because there's a strong lobbying groups about the Indian American Muslim Congress and other. They're highlighting that
their perception,
they're doing it. Whereas we had our very strong lobbying earlier, civil nuclear deal, we could convince a skeptical US Congress
and largely
to support
the Indian diaspora.
Yes,
outreach by the Indian.
I think we have had very good network of Indian diaspora. Even when the Prime Minister recently visited, how we had the Howdy Modi event and other things. So I think that's where our efforts should have increased. Secondly, about the US Congress, I'd like to tell you, they always take an independent stand. On a refugee issue, when there was a strong lobbying after the Second World War, the Jews suffered the Holocaust in Europe. So there was a demand by the administration, by the world, that all the Jews who have survived the Holocaust, who want to leave Europe, should be allowed into the United States. The US Congress said, no, we can't have all of them, because it will affect our population balance. They only allowed 50,000 of the Holocaust victims per year. Many others sneaked in and got separated. So everywhere this kind of protecting the local population, those instincts are strong. We saw it in Germany, we saw it in Scandinavian countries. We are seeing it in Turkey in a big way. So I think the government has to reach out to shades of opinion in different countries, because ultimately India means good. India is a good country. They have to be convinced about it.
And because everybody, especially the progressive democracies of the world, do say that we have shared values in terms of Indian democracy and India's plurality that Professor Mukherjee also highlighted. I think in the days to come, while the debate and discussions will continue, we'll see how the things shape up, and hoping that the people of India will understand the spirit of the law and how it is to be carried forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on the Citizenship Amendment Act. The participants were political analysts K.S. Sachidananda Murthy and Professor Subrato Mukherjee. K.V.Prasad, journalist, initiated and moderated the discussion. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can also listen to this program on our website, newsonair.com. You can also follow us on the News on AIR app for updates. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.